Many people believe that in order to forgive themselves, they need time, distance, or for the mistake to simply stop hurting. They believe that one day they will wake up and no longer feel guilt, shame, or regret. They wait for the past to lose its power on its own, but that almost never happens. And while they wait, they continue punishing themselves in silence. They relive over and over what they did wrong. They speak to themselves harshly. They define themselves by an error that already happened, yet they continue carrying it as if it were a sentence. Carl Jung understood that one of the greatest blocks to personal growth is not failure itself, but the inability to forgive oneself after it. When people do not forgive themselves, they become stuck. They doubt themselves, they fear trying again, they sabotage themselves before even beginning. Not because they lack ability, but because they are still fighting with a past version of who they once were. The truth is this: you cannot move forward while you continue to punish yourselves for something you can no longer change. The mistake has already fulfilled its function. It taught you, showed you a limit, gave you valuable information. But continuing to punish yourselves does not make you more responsible. It only keeps you stagnant. Self-forgiveness is not about justifying what happened. It is about deciding that your future is worth more than your guilt. When you forgive yourselves, you recover energy, you recover clarity, you recover power. You stop living while looking backward, and you begin to walk forward again. Because people who forgive themselves learn, mature, and move ahead. And everything changes the moment you decide to release the weight that no longer belongs for you to carry. There are people who believe they have already overcome their mistakes simply because time has passed, because they no longer talk about them, because no one else mentions them. But the truth is that many have not overcome them. They have only buried them. And what is buried without being resolved does not disappear. It rots inside and becomes a silent burden that affects decisions, relationships, self-esteem, and direction. That is the invisible prison of the unforgiven mistake. It has no bars and no guards, yet it limits every step you take. A mistake from the past can become a mental cell if you repeat it in your mind again and again. When you wake up remembering it, when you compare yourselves to who you could have been, when you tell yourselves that if you had acted differently, your life today would be better. That internal punishment does not make you more responsible or more conscious. It only keeps you tied to an old version of yourselves. And the most dangerous part is that over time, you get used to that prison. You begin to believe that you deserve to be there. Carl Jung observed how brilliant people sabotage their future, not because of a lack of capacity, but because of loyalty to their guilt. They continue paying a debt that no longer exists. They continue punishing themselves for decisions made with less information, less maturity, less awareness. And the more they punish themselves, the less they allow themselves to grow. Because growth would require accepting that they have already learned, that they have already changed, that they are no longer that person. The problem is not the mistake. Everyone who achieves something meaningful has failed. The problem appears when you cling to the mistake as an identity, when you stop saying, "I made a mistake," and begin saying, "I am the mistake." At that moment, you stop moving forward. You begin to play small. You avoid opportunities. You settle for less than what you know you are capable of achieving, not because you cannot do more, but because you no longer feel worthy. Prolonged guilt creates a constant state of self-punishment. You demand more from yourselves, but you allow yourselves less. You work hard, but you do not enjoy it. You achieve things, but you do not acknowledge them. And deep inside, there is always a voice reminding you that you should not be where you are, that you do not deserve more, that something within you is broken. That voice is not the truth. It is only an echo of a past that was never confronted. People who do not forgive themselves live divided. One part wants to move forward, grow, try something new, while another part pulls them backward, reminding them of what they did wrong. That internal tension exhausts, drains energy, and shuts down motivation. And over time, many confuse that exhaustion with a lack of ambition, when in reality, it is an excess of emotional weight. You are carrying something that no longer belongs to you. You were not designed to live looking backward. The past exists to teach, not to rule. But as long as you do not make that invisible prison conscious, you will continue making decisions from guilt instead of from power. And no extraordinary life is built from constant self-punishment. True transformation begins when you dare to look at your mistake directly, not to attack yourselves, but to free yourselves. Because no one can move forward with strength while remaining chained to what has already been. There is a conversation that most people have every single day, yet they almost never question it. It does not happen out loud, it happens in silence, in the mind. It is the way you speak to yourselves when no one else is listening. And for many, that voice is not compassionate or fair. It is harsh, cold, and relentless. It reminds you of what you did wrong, what you failed at, what you lost. It speaks to you with a level of cruelty you would never use with someone you love. Carl Jung taught that the inner dialogue shapes the outer destiny. Sooner or later, you become the voice you listen to the most. And if that voice defines you by your mistake, your mind begins to operate from distrust, fear, and self-censorship. No matter how many opportunities appear, if deep inside you tell yourselves that you do not deserve to move forward, you will always find a reason to stop. Many people believe that speaking harshly to themselves is a form of discipline. They assume that if they punish themselves enough, they will not repeat the same mistake. But this is a dangerous illusion. Constant self-punishment does not create excellence. It creates paralysis. It does not generate growth. It generates anxiety. You do not improve because you insult yourself every day. You improve when you learn, adjust, and keep moving forward. The right inner voice is not the one that humiliates, but the one that guides with firmness and clarity. Notice this carefully. When you fail, the inner voice does not simply point out the fact. It exaggerates it and turns it into a general rule. It says, "You always do the same thing. You never change. You are not enough." And every time you accept those phrases without questioning them, you turn them into beliefs. Over time, those beliefs shape your identity, and an identity built on guilt never dares to go beyond what is familiar. Pause for a moment and listen to how you speak to yourself when you remember that mistake that still weighs on you. Listen to the exact words, the tone, the intention, because there lies the root of your stagnation, not in what happened, but in how you continue to narrate it inside your mind. As long as that inner narrative does not change, your behavior will not change either. If this message resonates with you, it is because deep down, you already know that it is time to transform that internal conversation. And if you wish to keep going deeper into this inner work, remember to stay present in the process, because each reflection is built upon the previous one. This is not a message to consume and forget. it is a message to apply. Now ask yourself something and answer with honesty, even if you choose to write it down. Which mistake from your past are you still using today to punish yourself, even though you have already learned from it? Naming it is the first act of power. Recognizing it is the beginning of forgiveness, because the moment you stop attacking yourselves internally, you begin to regain control. The greatest mistake many people make is not failing, but confusing themselves with their failure. They merge an action with their identity, a moment with an entire life, a stumble with their value as human beings. When this happens, they stop seeing themselves as people in process and begin to see themselves as damaged individuals. This confusion is devastating, because no one moves forward when they believe that they themselves are the problem. From the perspective of Carl Jung, an error does not define a person. It reveals them. It reveals their level of consciousness at that moment. It reveals what they did not yet know, what they had not yet developed, what they had not yet understood. No one makes a poor decision from their most integrated self. They make it from the version they were at that moment. Judging who you are today with the mind you had yesterday is a subtle form of inner injustice. You are not the mistake you made. You are the person who learned from it. And if you have not yet learned, then the mistake remains an unfinished lesson, not a sentence. Life does not punish, it teaches. But it only teaches those who are willing to look honestly and without hatred at what occurred. When you hate yourselves for failing, learning closes. When you observe yourselves with responsibility, the experience is integrated. Many people say, if I had been smarter, if I had been stronger, if I had thought better. But the truth is this: you decided with the tools you had at that time, with the information available, with the level of emotional maturity you had developed up to that point. Pretending that you should have acted like the person you are today is to ignore the natural process of growth. No one is born knowing. No one evolves without mistakes. Error serves a specific function. It shows you a limit, points to an inner inconsistency, and pushes you to develop a capacity you did not yet possess. But when you turn the error into identity, that function is lost. You no longer see the lesson, you only see shame. And shame does not transform, it paralyzes. It does not expand, it contracts. A person consumed by shame does not grow, they hide. Separating who you are from what you did is an act of maturity. It does not mean denying responsibility, it means assuming it without self-destruction. A responsible person says, "This was a mistake. I learn, I correct, and I continue." A person trapped in guilt says, "This proves that I am not enough." One moves forward, the other stays behind. True strength is not found in never failing, but in not living inside the failure, in using it as a point of adjustment rather than an anchor. When you understand that your identity is larger than your worst decision, something shifts internally. This applies equally to all of us, men and women, because growth belongs to those who choose consciousness over self-attack. The pressure eases, clarity expands, and for the first time in a long while, you stop fighting your past and begin using it as fuel. Because the mistake did not come to destroy you, it came to shape you. There is a silent price that many people pay when they do not forgive themselves. Shame is not always visible. It is not always expressed, but it is there, infiltrating the way you speak, the way you show up, and what you allow yourself to attempt. Shame does not shout, it whispers. And that whisper says, "Better not. Do not expose yourself. Do not fail again. This is how a past error becomes fear of the future. Carl Jung observed that shame does not arise only from what happened, but from the meaning you attach to it. When you decide that your mistake defines something final about who you are, you begin to hide. You avoid opportunities where you could shine. You reject challenges before they begin. Not because you lack ability, but because you fear confirming the negative story you already tell yourself. And so, without realizing it, you shrink your own life. The fear of trying again almost always comes from the fear of feeling the same shame once more. You are not afraid of failure itself. You are afraid of the emotion you believe failure will bring. That is why many people remain in familiar zones, even if they are small. They prefer the discomfort of mediocrity over the risk of feeling insufficient again. But that choice has consequences. The most serious one is stagnation. A stagnant person is not always a person without talent. Very often, it is someone who convinced themselves they do not have the right to move forward, who feels they must first pay, compensate, suffer a little more before allowing growth. And while waiting for that inner permission that never arrives, life passes, opportunities cool, motivation fades, and what could have been turns into regret. Shame also affects how you relate to others. It builds walls, avoids depth, keeps emotional distance because you fear that if someone sees too much, they will discover what you have not yet forgiven in yourself. In this way, the mistake impacts not only your progress, but also your human connection. You feel alone, even when accompanied. But here is a truth you must hear clearly. Shame is not a sign that you are weak. It is a sign that something has not been integrated. And what is not integrated either repeats itself or hides. Neither path leads to a full life. The only real way out is to face it with honesty and resolve. When you stop running from your mistake and look at it without fear, shame loses its power. When you choose to move forward despite it, fear begins to dissolve. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It is conscious action in spite of it. And every step you take forward, even with fear, shows you something fundamental, that your past does not have the authority to dictate your future. Many people wait to feel forgiven in order to forgive themselves. They wait for guilt to disappear first, for the pain to calm, for the emotion to change, but that waiting can last years. Carl Jung learned that self-forgiveness is not an emotion that arrives on its own. It is a decision taken with inner discipline. It does not occur when you feel ready. It occurs when you choose to take responsibility for your own psyche. Forgiving yourself does not mean erasing what happened or pretending it did not matter. It means recognizing the fact with maturity and stopping the use of it as a weapon against yourself. It is a conscious act of inner authority. A disciplined person is not governed by emotional impulses, but by guiding principles. And one of the most important principles of psychological growth is this: you cannot build a solid future while punishing yourself for the past. Self-forgiveness is a daily practice. It is not a single conversation or an emotional promise. It is a choice renewed every time your mind tries to return to reproach. Each time the inner voice wants to attack you, you intervene, correct, redirect, and say, "I learned, I took responsibility, I continue." That repetition is mental discipline, and mental discipline creates freedom. Many confuse self-forgiveness with weakness. They believe that letting go means losing control or failing again. But the opposite happens. A person who forgives themselves becomes more responsible, not less, because they stop reacting from guilt and start acting from clarity. You no longer need to punish yourself to stay in line. Your motivation stops being fear and becomes purpose. Self-punishment exhausts. Forgiveness brings order. When you forgive yourself, your energy stops dispersing in inner conflict. It concentrates, focuses, regains direction. And with clear direction, decisions become simpler. You no longer ask whether you deserve to move forward. You move forward because you understand that growth is your responsibility, not your reward. Forgiving yourself also means accepting that you are a human being in construction, learning, and that making mistakes does not disqualify you. It humanizes you. True discipline is not demanding perfection. It is committing to constant improvement. And no one improves from self-hatred. Improvement is born from self-respect. When you turn forgiveness into a habit, something deep occurs. The past loses weight, the mind organizes itself, the present becomes lighter, and for the first time in a long while, you feel that you are not fighting yourself, but walking with yourself. That is the real beginning of sustained progress. Because a person who leads themselves with firmness and compassion is someone who can finally move forward without dragging invisible chains. When someone truly begins to forgive themselves, there is no immediate external spectacle. There is no applause, no visible signs, but internally, something reorganizes. The psyche stops spending energy on defense and starts using it for creation. Carl Jung have seen people who seem stuck for years recover momentum, not because their environment changed, but because they stopped fighting themselves. Clarity is one of the first signs of authentic forgiveness. You think more clearly, decide with less inner noise. You no longer analyze every step from the fear of repeating the past, but from the intention to build the future. Self-forgiveness removes the need to constantly justify yourself. When you stop carrying guilt, you stop explaining yourself. And a person who does not need to explain themselves is a person who acts with inner firmness. Energy also returns. Guilt consumes. Self-punishment drains. But when you release that weight, vitality returns. You wake with more focus. You move with greater determination. Not because everything is easy, but because you are no longer divided internally. A person aligned with themselves advances faster, even on difficult terrain. With forgiveness comes something essential: direction. Before, many decisions were guided by the fear of making mistakes. Now, they are guided by values. You no longer ask, "What if I fail again?" You ask, "Is this aligned with the person I choose to become?" That difference completely changes the quality of your life, because you stop living in reaction and start living with intention. Recovering personal power does not mean becoming arrogant. It means trusting your inner judgment again. It means understanding that you can make mistakes and still correct your course. A person who forgives themselves is not paralyzed by the possibility of error. They learn to move with responsibility and flexibility, and that combination is one of the greatest strengths you can develop. Your presence also changes. Others perceive you as more stable, clearer, more authentic, because you are no longer acting from an open wound. You are acting from integration. And an integrated person inspires trust, even without speaking. Inner congruence is always felt. When you forgive yourself, you stop living on pause. You stop postponing your life while waiting to feel worthy. You understand that dignity is not earned through punishment. It is exercised through movement. Every coherent action reinforces your new identity, and little by little, the person who once doubted themselves begins to recognize themselves again, not as someone perfect, but as someone capable. And that changes everything. There comes a moment in the life of every human being in which they must decide whether they will continue carrying the past or finally walk free. It is not a comfortable decision. It is a deep one, because releasing guilt means saying goodbye to a familiar identity, even if it was painful. Carl Jung say this with absolute clarity. You did not come into this life to eternally pay for what you have already understood. You came to grow, to contribute, and to move forward. The past does not need your punishment. It needs your understanding. It already happened. It already fulfilled its function. Continuing to punish yourselves does not make you more whole. It makes you smaller. And smaller people do not honor their potential. Every day that you reproach yourselves for something you can no longer change, you are handing your present energy to a time that no longer exists. Carl Jung taught that this is one of the quietest ways to waste life. Forgiving yourselves is not forgetting. It is remembering without pain. It is being able to look back without shrinking inward. It is recognizing the people you once were and saying to them, you did the best you could with what you knew. And then giving permission to the people you are today to take control. Because you are not your worst moment. You are the sum of what you learned after it. There is an immense force in reconciling with yourselves. When you stop fighting internally, all that energy transforms into presence, character, and direction. You walk differently, decide differently, live differently, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer divided. From the perspective of Carl Jung, a whole human being is dangerous to mediocrity. Life does not ask you for perfection. It asks you for honesty, responsibility, and movement. It asks you not to remain living where you no longer belong. Each day that dawns is a silent invitation to begin again, not from zero, but from experience. And only those who forgive themselves can accept that invitation without fear. Today, you can choose to release the burden. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Today, you can decide that the mistake has already taught what it needed to teach, that guilt no longer commands, that the past does not rule. That decision, even if no one sees it, changes your destiny. Remember this and carry it with you. The person who forgives themselves becomes unstoppable, not because they never fall, but because they no longer stay on the ground. They rise with dignity, move forward with awareness, and live with the calm certainty of knowing they did not abandon themselves. That is true power. That is true forgiveness. And everything begins when you decide here and now to walk lightly, freely, and at peace with yourselves.